This podcast accompanies the acclaimed new docuseries In the Eye of the Storm, which follows the remarkable journey of maverick economist, politician and whistleblower Yanis Varoufakis. Both the series and podcast explore the connections between power, democracy, capitalism and the deepening crises of civilization. The series is available to watch now. Details in the description. Enjoy the conversation.
I'm curious if you and Yanis have crossed paths before, or is this the first time?
Ideologically, we have, but not personally. I've been very aware of Yanis's work ever since the 2013 Greek crisis, and then in preparing my own recent book, The Myth of Normal, I read his book about the weak shall suffer, and I've been very aware of his speaking on many issues, including as a Jew. I've been very appreciative of his speaking out on Palestine. So yeah, we've crossed paths ideologically, but not in person. So it's a pleasure.
If I may butt in to say that it's a great honor for me to be meeting you for the first time, well, even in two dimensions, having followed your work for many years myself, your activism regarding mental health, especially your struggle to demedicalize to a very large extent what are social effects on people's psychology. For people like myself, who are not Jewish, but who are supremely cognizant of the uniqueness of the evil that was involved in the Holocaust, and who, because we are sensitized by
Ja, das haben wir alle mitbekommen, ne? Dass Varoufakis quasi einen Bann bekommen hat, auch, ne? Also diese Konferenz wurde gestürmt, ne? Von der Knüppelbrigade und ja, wisst ihr Bescheid. Staatsräson, wichtig.
the Holocaust.
Hallo Freak.
Let's face it, these days, I cannot speak without being branded an anti-Semite the moment I open my mouth for not supporting the genocide of the Palestinians. So to have somebody like you, it gives us the strength and the opportunity to continue to fight the good fight simultaneously against anti-Semitism and against the genocide of the Palestinians.
Ja, ich glaube, Varoufakis hat öffentlich eine Melone gegessen. Ich denke, er hat sie auch aufgeschnitten und in die Kamera gehalten und damit die Farben. Ihr wisst schon. Also ungefähr so schlimm wie dass Greta Thunberg diesen Tintenfisch da. Also diesen hier. Ihr wisst schon. Hentai-Tentakel und so.
I appreciate that. You know, I want to make a comment
Hallo,
about
Schröck.
the uniqueness of the Holocaust. And you'll probably agree with this. There's something colonialist about branding the Jewish Holocaust as absolutely unique. I mean, it was horrendous, and the technological, bureaucratic doggedness with which it was pursued. But let's face it, the Belgians killed 10 million Congolese just 50 years before the Jewish Holocaust. Nobody ever talks about that, you know. And the first genocide by Germans happened not against Jews, but in I think what is in Namibia now, but somewhere in Africa.
Jetzt
And
relativieren die natürlich,
those things,
ich sag mal, nicht zu ihren Gunsten und vergleichen jetzt hier Genozide und so und sagen, guck mal da. Ich finde das immer ein bisschen albern. Das ist überhaupt nicht notwendig, ne? Ich meine, klar, kann man schon machen, aber wozu eigentlich, ne? Und ich meine, dieses Argument mit der Holocaust ist einmalig, weil er halt industriell so geplant wurde, das gilt ja trotzdem, ne? Also das kann man den Antideutschen ja nicht madig machen. Dieses Argument stimmt ja auch. Deswegen finde ich es immer so albern, so nochmal von vorne, ja, guck mal hier, Zahlen und so. Und da übrigens auch Völkermord und so. Ja, klar, gibt's. Haben wir geklärt. Mich
are
nervt das Thema aber
sanitized
auch.
from history. And it's a little bit like the current, without getting into the politics of the Ukraine war. In Canada, for example, Ukrainian refugees are welcomed without any conditions whatsoever. But Gazans, they only accept a few 1,000,
Wer ist
and
Justus
they have their
Wertmüller?
relatives living in Canada. So there's a kind of a Eurocentric view of who suffers, who doesn't. And not to minimize what happened to my own people, nearly to me, actually, as an infant, but there is something Eurocentric about specializing the Jewish Holocaust while ignoring the mass killings of people all over the world under the colonial system. And certainly the creation of Israel itself was almost a way of Europe outsourcing its guilt onto the Palestinians. If you said this, you'd be called an anti-Semite. When I say it, I'm called a self-hating Jew. But I'll take it. You know.
Well, I take it from the Greeks. I'm a self-hating Greek when I'm criticizing Greek ethnic cleansing in the north of Greece, for instance. But let me make the point that you're absolutely right. There is no point, and it is quite misanthropic, to create a hierarchy of atrocities and to say, well, this is the worst, the second worst is that one, the third one. Okay, there is no way you can compare and contrast the pain of people and to come up with a metric by which to measure which was the worst. The reason why I insist that there is a uniqueness about the Holocaust, without meaning that it was more horrendous than what happened to the Algerians from the French or to the Congolese by the Belgians. What astonishes me, and it's been astonishing me ever since I was a very young person and I found out that this was what happened, was when the Nazis came to Greece, which were they were not planning initially to come to Greece. That is important. They were not initially planning. They had subcontracted Greece to Mussolini, and yet they had the address and sometimes the telephone number, because there were some telephone numbers back then, of every Jewish family living in Greece. What strikes me, and that's why I think it's unique, was the attitude of the stamp collector. Like a stamp collector will die if he doesn't find the last stamp of the collection. If there's one stamp missing, he's not going to be able to sleep at night. Okay, that's how the Nazis were with the Jews. They had to get everyone, including people who had a tiny little connection with some Jewish ancestry. Now that has never happened before. The Belgians were not interested in the blacks. They were interested in Congo. They wanted the minerals. They wanted the wealth. Okay, if there was a way of shifting, millions of Congolese away, you press a button and get rid of them to go somewhere else. They would have pressed it. They were not killing them instrumentally. So that is why I'm saying that the Holocaust is unique.
I agree with you in that sense. It was. My main problem is the justification for what's happening in Palestine, and it's been so many decades now of oppression and occupation and ethnic cleansing and dispossession and repeated massacres, and we're still invoking the Holocaust, and it's appalling to see it being employed as a justification for what's been happening in Palestine. That's my main problem with it. I'd love to turn.
Ist das so? Also ich kenne mich ja mit diesen bescheuerten rechtskonservativen Volllappen da aus dieser israelischen Regierung nicht aus, aber ist das so? Sagen die, weil Holocaust, oder sagen die einfach hier, weil Hamas und weil Iran? Das hätte ich jetzt angenommen, dass sie das sagen. Da braucht man ja nicht immer ständig die Holocaust-Karte spielen. Das ergibt ja eigentlich keinen Sinn.
In the conversation to your work, though, if I may, I mean, I have some questions for you.
Sure.
Okay, 10 Sekunden.
In my
Bei der
book, The
letzten
Myth of Normal,
Netanyahu-Rede.
I
Na
talk
gut.
about the impact of social
Whatever.
factors on health, and I referred to a study that was done in Greece in 2013 when there's the economic crisis, and they compared the stress hormone levels of young Greeks with young Swedes, and the stress hormone levels of young Greeks were lower than normal, which means that their stress system had been exhausted, and that's a major risk for disease later on. And this is what people don't realize, is that politics and social factors have such a huge impact on health. We think that health is just a isolated individual event in a discrete, separate body, but actually there's so much evidence now, and I know you realize this, that social factors impact not just economics and political movements or political events, but also people's health. And here's what I want to ask you about Greece. This has always fascinated me. You guys were elected, Syriza, that where you were the finance minister. The Greeks elected you guys with a firm mandate to oppose the economic destruction of your country. Your party was elected, and almost overnight it turned around. And what happened there psychologically within your party, but also in the Greek population, that later on they just accepted this as inevitable? So people so quickly gave up their hopes and their dreams and their point of view. How does the system maintain such control that people have no individuality left? They have no independence of thought or action left. What happened there? I've never seen such a rapid turnaround.
You're quite right. Let's take it from the top. Before 2015, you're quite right. We had a quadrupling of suicides as a result of the loss of hope. You see, it's not poverty, because Greeks have been poor for eons. Poverty has been part and parcel of the Greek condition. When I was growing up, Greece was poorer than it was in 2012, 2013. It's the substantial and very fast loss of means to reproduce one's life that drives people to mental destruction. The reason why I went into that government was because the young prime minister that had led the party, and Alexis Tsipras, had inspired me, as well as millions of people out there. I remember walking to his prime ministerial office after our swearing ceremony, and we looked into one another's eyes, we hugged, and we said, "Oh shit, what are we doing now?" Because we were in command of the most bankrupt state probably in the world. But in the weeks that followed, he came to an agreement with our foes, with the foes of our people, with the creditors, with the financiers, with Angela Merkel, the Chancellor of Germany. It's clear that he came to an agreement. I was a problem. I was in his way because he wanted to surrender. And I had, old-time communists saying to me, I've been through the pain of the split of the Communist Party, through the pain of the civil war, through the pain. I can't have another civil war. So lots of people stayed with that government, giving them the benefit of the doubt, knowing that they were doing the wrong thing, because emotionally they could not handle it. And the last thing I want to say is this. Then Tsipras, after he surrendered and signed all the most awful pieces of legislation that were dictated, they were sent to him from Brussels and Berlin and Frankfurt by email. And Gabor, I don't know whether you can understand what it felt like to be in Parliament, because I was a member of Parliament. I didn't resign from that, obviously. And we were getting pieces of legislation that were 1,000 pages long. And it was clear that they were translated by Google Translate, because they were written in German or in English, and they were sent to Parliament the night before through Google Translate. And Google Translate was much worse than it is today. He says it was impossible to even read them, But of course, nobody read them, because those who voted against anyway. And those who voted in favor, the only way they could vote in favor is by not knowing what they were voting for. So, and then immediately after that, 2 months later, he stages an election. And he wins it. Because the alternative was the right that was enthusiastic about the surrender. I mean, he was not enthusiastic about the surrender. So people had to choose between somebody who was surrendering unenthusiastically and the bastards from the right who were very gung-ho that we had surrendered. And so they voted for him, on the
Ja,
basis of the
genau.
lesser of two evils.
Das kleinere Übel, ja, ist ja logisch. Sozialdemokraten eben, ne?
Logic.
A number of things come up for me. One is that there was a phrase by Bertolt Brecht that you might recall, where the great German playwright, where he said that the government is disappointed in the people. Maybe they should elect the different people.
That's where I stole the expression that he overthrew the people. Yes.
Yeah.
I stole it from Brecht.
I grew up in Hungary, as you might know, and I was 13 years old when the Hungarian Revolution broke out, and which kind of opened my eyes to the realities of that system. But the ideological control in communist Eastern Europe was far more fragile and far more transparent and easy to resist, at least intellectually, than ideological control that we have here in the West.
Ja.
I mean,
Das ist ja das, was Zizek immer sagt, ne? Es ist viel schwieriger, diesen ganzen Schwachsinn mit der Political Correctness und so irgendwie zu entkommen, als bei einem Stalin zu wissen, okay, das ist jetzt hier aber wirklich der autoritäre Wichser und das ist der Feind und ich mache alles nur, damit er mich nicht umbringt, aber ich mache es widerwillig so. Das ist viel einfacher, weil man da sieht, was das Problem ist.
they had, in one of your recent interviews, you talk about the Matrix, and in Eastern Europe, there used to be this joke that you could be honest, intelligent, or a member of the Communist Party. In fact, you could be two of those three things, but not three at the same time. People could see through it. Here in the West, people actually think they're free, but as you said in the recent interview, they're living inside a matrix, and where inside the matrix you think you're free, but you're totally controlled. And maybe you want to talk about this matrix that we're caught up in. Where
Ja, wir können uns halt sozusagen nur aussuchen, welche Rauschmittel und welche Betäubungen wir haben wollen, ne? Das ist quasi das, was der Konsumerismus uns für eine Wahl lässt. Für alles andere kommt meistens die Staatsgewalt und hindert dich. Schreckt dich ein.
we think we're free, but actually we're so controlled.
My father was a communist. He was as Raoul knows, he met him. He was in a prison camp, but he told me that, and this is something I keep repeating for our audience's sake, especially left-wing audiences, who must understand that the left is perfectly capable of creating a lot of authoritarianism. My father used to say to me that when he was in the prison camp, a loyal communist, he died a communist. Nevertheless, he told me that he knew that had we won, our side won the civil war, and Greece was a communist country, he would probably be in the same concentration camp with different guards. That's what my dad used to say. So that's that. On the question of technology, okay, my latest book, I call it techno-feudalism. I think that the markets have been sidelined by something like digital thieves. And of course, you are absolutely right. It's not that technology has taken over. Under capitalism, it wasn't the steam engine's fault that we had capitalism. The Luddites were not smashing machines because they hated the machines, because the machines were taking over. The Luddites, who, by the way, are probably the most misunderstood agents in political history, they were simply protesting the loss of their livelihood. And they were protesting the distribution of income produced by the machines and labor. And they were saying, quite naturally, well, if these machines can make us all richer, we want some of those riches. So similarly, my thesis, my hypothesis in the recent book, Techno-Feudalism, is that the reinforcement learning AI-driven algorithms, which live inside our phones, on our laptops, in this networked capital, which I call cloud capital, because it's supposed to be uploaded on the cloud. It's not a cloud, of course. It's huge server farms that look like normal factories in the United States, in China, in Europe, everywhere, connected with material optic fiber cables and cell towers. It's all capital, right? But I call it cloud capital to distinguish it from steam engines, railways, electricity grids, even very modern industrial robots, because all these, the standard forms of capital, whether it is a fishing rod or a very
Die befinden sich nicht auf
advanced industrial
Datenträgern
robot,
halt,
they are
ne?
produced to means of production. Machines who produce something else. But the algorithmic capital, which I call cloud capital, is a produced means of behavioral modification. It doesn't produce anything. It simply is an automated system for modifying human behavior. So it does.
Ja, das kann man schon so sagen. Ne? Also ich meine, ich habe das Buch natürlich nicht gelesen und so, aber das kann man schon so sagen. Ne? Also das ist ja das Businessmodell von den großen Plattformen. Die verkaufen ja quasi die Option, zielgerichtet eine gewisse Zielgruppe zu manipulieren und ihre Entscheidungen in was auch immer, zum Beispiel Kaufentscheidungen, zu ändern. Mit einer vorher angegebenen Signifikanz und Wahrscheinlichkeit, ne? Also mit einer gewissen Genauigkeit. Das ist das Produkt, was verkauft wird. Ich denke, was er meint mit Feudalismus, ist halt, dass es sozusagen, naja, aufgeteilt wird zwischen den großen Playern, die sich den Markt durch, die sich den Markt, ihren Marktvorteil schon erspielt haben, der nicht mehr abgegeben wird. Und natürlich, die Konsumenten haben ja teilweise keine Wahl, als das Internet zu benutzen und die angebotenen Apps zu verwenden und so, weil sie ja überleben müssen im Techno-Feudalism. Ja, es ist ja für die meisten schon ziemlich schwer, ohne Smartphone überhaupt was zu machen. Viele Sachen sind ja teilweise heutzutage gar nicht mehr möglich ohne Smartphone. So, denke ich, wird man da wahrscheinlich zum Leibeigenen gemacht. Hallo, Hikiko.
All sorts of things that machines could never do. I mean, until recently, you needed a good advertiser in order to create an advertisement that persuades people to buy McDonald's, to buy Coca-Cola, to buy Mercedes-Benzes, whatever. So you had the creative mind of a good advertiser. You know, I use Don Draper from Mad Men as an example, right? Who is, a service provider. He provides the service to the conglomerate, so that the conglomerate can sell more stuff to you and me. Okay, but cloud capital today, this algorithmic capital, which is inside Amazon.com, inside Google, inside Facebook, inside TikTok, and a myriad of other digital platforms, or cloud thieves as I call them. What this machine does, cloud capital, is it arrests your attention like television used to. It inputs into your mind desires that you didn't have, like advertisers used to.
Mm-hmm.
But it does that through an infinite two-way regress. Advertisement used to be a one-way street. You watched something on television, it went into your mind, and you wanted a McDonald's, and you went to the McDonald's, you ate it. But that was it. It was one way. Now, with Alexa, with Siri, with all of the devices, it is an infinite regress, because you train it to train you, to train it, to train you, to train it.
Ich denke, Schröck, er sagt das mit dem Feudalism vor allem deswegen, weil Staaten komplett machtlos sind in dieser Hinsicht. Und es sozusagen ein Rückschritt ist, weil die Entmachtung der Staaten de facto sowas ist wie eine Re-Enabling von sowas Ähnlichem wie Feudalismus. Bloß, dass es halt wirklich nur ganz wenig Königreiche gibt. Vielleicht meint er das damit. Und vielleicht wollte er sozusagen einfach nur darauf hinaus, um zu zeigen, dass das ja eigentlich Machtverhältnisse sind, die wir ja mal irgendwann hatten. Aber wahrscheinlich ist es nicht ganz treffend, ne? Weil damals waren ja die Fürstenhäuser mit den Leibeigenen bei weitem nicht so groß, wie das jetzt der Fall ist. Ne? Ich denke, er will damit nur klar machen, dass Staaten hier nicht mehr so, gar keine Protagonisten mehr so richtig sind. Wir sehen ja auch, dass alles, was den Techno-Feudalism angeht, die Staaten und die Regierenden und die EU zum Beispiel immer Jahre hinterherhinkt, hinter der Entwicklung. Die reagieren, wenn, dann viel zu spät, und dann kann sich das Cloud-Kapital sozusagen schon darauf anpassen. Insbesondere kann das Cloud-Kapital ja meistens auch mitschreiben. an den Gesetzesvorlagen. Ne?
Ad infinitum. To know you so that it gives you suggestions that inspire you to buy
Und
stuff.
nicht vergessen, also ich weiß ja nicht, wie viele von euch das Buch jetzt schon von mir da haben. Ich habe es auch schon mal in irgendeinem Video gesagt. Es gibt Konzerne auf dieser Welt, die mächtiger sind als Staaten. Einfach deswegen, weil sie von Staaten Profite umleiten können. Ne? Und das war eine der Definitionen für mich für Machtgefälle. Ne? Aus dieser Schlussfolgerung kann man aber sagen, okay, wenn das so ist, dann sind Staaten ja auch also dann werden Staaten ausgebeutet. Und ja, wenn man das einmal hat, ne, dann ist es doch gar nicht mehr so weit davon entfernt zu sagen, okay, das ist sowas ähnliches wie Feudalismus, bloß dass die Staaten jetzt sozusagen auch Bedienstete sind, mehr oder weniger.
You would not have thought of
Aber
buying.
ja, also
And
das
then it
Wort
sells
ist
it to you
halt so,
directly, bypassing every single market. And does so by charging the owner of that cloud capital, who owns the produced means of behavioral modification. He has the capacity to do two things at once: to charge the capitalist who sells you the binoculars or the electric bicycle or the book that you buy from Amazon.com, to charge them 40%. That's a rent. I call it the cloud rent. That's why I'm talking about techno-feudalism, not techno-capitalism. Okay, and at the same time.
okay. Das ist der Grund, ne? Er sagt halt, das ist halt einfach das leistungslose Einkommen ist hier der wesentliche Trick. Weil Kapitalisten ja typischerweise, und Yanis ist ja ein Wirtschaftswissenschaftler, ne? Kapitalisten zeichnen sich ja auch dadurch aus, dass sie investieren und so. Mit Break-Even-Point und so einem Scheiß, ne? Das haben die aber alles in ihrem Techno-Feudalism nicht. Deswegen benutzt der Feudalism.
When you like something, when you post a review on Amazon, when you upload a video on Instagram or TikTok, you are replenishing with your free labor. I call that cloud surf labor. You are replenishing their capital stock, their cloud capital. So you're right. It's not a technology that's taking over. It's a new ruling class that owns cloud capital, which is a mutation of capital, which is killed capitalism. That's my thesis.
It's also so confident of its control that even allows you and I to talk like this across thousands of kilometers and to have this talk broadcast to a lot of people, but they're not worried that it's going to make any difference.
In your book, Gabor, you write about
Correct.
the toxic culture that we live in and how that is basically at the root of the health crisis, the physical and mental health crisis. I wonder if you could talk a bit about that and perhaps how that relates to this rapid technological advancement that we're seeing that Yanis articulated.
Yeah. Well, the toxicity in the culture resides in the fact that it's not designed to meet human needs. It's designed to meet the needs of those in control. And that imposes certain conditions. First of all, it inculcates a certain psychology, which is that of...
alles andere wäre auch Tinder-Effekt, ne? Also, wenn es hier darum ginge, was Leute wirklich brauchen und was sozusagen der Need ist. Wenn es im Kapitalismus darum ginge, was die Leute tatsächlich nachfragen, das wäre ja großartig, ne? Aber darum geht es natürlich nicht. Wir wissen alle im Kapitalismus, das ist Tinder-Effekt. Es geht nur um Profite, ne? Klar. Die sind nicht allein, diese beiden Sachen, ne? Die müssen überhaupt nichts miteinander zu tun haben. Und wir sehen ja auch, dass sie nichts miteinander zu tun haben.
Passivity and acquiescence to power. And as Yanis was talking about, a kind of passive consumerism, where we're motivated to act not according to our needs, but according to the desires inculcated in us by the system. And for that to happen, from early in life, we have to be disconnected from our feelings and our gut feelings, actually, and be disconnected from ourselves. And there's many conditions in this society that create that from actually in utero onwards, because the more stressed people are, already pregnant women who are stressed, that's going to affect the physiology and the psychology of their infants in the womb and afterwards. And then the way we raise kids, which is no longer like I was in Greece a few times, and more in Greece still, but much less so than it used to be. There still is the sense of community and communalism. I don't mean communism, I mean communalism, the sense that we belong together. People dance in the streets together, and communities still know each other, and they eat together and all that. But that's falling apart in Greece. I know that. People are getting more individualistic, more competitive, more isolated. There's an epidemic of loneliness, and loneliness itself is a risk factor for disease. In the West, particularly in the globalized precincts of North America, but increasingly in Europe as well, there are less and less of that sense of community, more and more sense of isolation, individualistic aspiration, where our aspirations are no longer what's good for the whole, but what's good for me in opposition to everybody else. Those ideologies and that way of being actually makes people physically sick. And that suppression of the self that this society from an early age on actually has physiological implications for our health. And not to mention, and I talked about this earlier, the stress imposed by the insecurity, by the loss of
Danke,
control.
Karim.
I mean, you look at the major factors that promote stress, they're loss of control, loss of security, conflict, lack of a sense of agency. Those conditions actually stress people physiologically, which makes them more prone for illness. So that what I'm saying overall is that the very nature of this system functions to disempower people, to have them pursue needs that are not real needs, as Yanis was just talking about, but desires ingrained in them through a very subtle system of propaganda and control. And that actually makes us sick. And so if you look at the epidemic of more kids being diagnosed with depression, anxiety, attention problems, suicidality, more and more adults. I mean, Yanis mentioned the suicide rate in Greece. After the fall of the Soviet Union, there was a huge, because of the loss of the social network. Whatever you can say about communism, I'm not here to advocate for Soviet communism, but the end of it created a lot of insecurity, a lot of suicide, a lot more people dying of alcoholism. In North America last year, I don't know if you guys know this, but in 1 year, more Americans died of overdoses. Twice as many Americans died of overdoses in 1 year than died in the Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghan wars put together. And so
Ja, die haben doch gerade diese völlig bescheuerte Betäubungsmittel-Nummer da am Start, ne?
these are not individual problems. They're the outcomes of a certain system. And that's why I'm calling it a toxic culture.
Die kriegen das einfach alle verschrieben. Fentanyl. Richtig reingeknallt.
Especially in North America and in the United States, there were 4 waves that led to these deaths of despair, of collective angst to a large extent. You had the collapse of the New Deal with the end of Bretton Woods in 1971, which saw for the first time the working class in the United States, for the very, very first time, working Americans.
Well, I think if I may interrupt, I think you said in one of your interviews that until the fall of the Soviet Union, the ruling elite had a reason to buy off the working class by better wages and living conditions, because there was kind of a threat, a competition. Once the competition disappeared, the gloves came off.
Indeed. And that's when you had fees being imposed on students in Britain and in Australia. You had the complete collapse of any attempt to show a civilized face for capitalism. But besides that, there was a major crisis of capitalism with the end of Bretton Woods in 1971, which saw for the first time in the history of the United States a significant diminution of the living standards of the working class. For the first time, you had, even during the Great Depression, those who worked, because prices were falling faster than wages, their spending power was not falling if you managed to hold on to your job, right? And then Roosevelt comes in, and the war very quickly creates a period during which inequality shrinks. But after 1975, I mean, even today, median salaries in the wages in hourly wages in the United States are lower than what they were in 1975. So you have this major. That's the first wave. The second wave comes when the social contract changes, and what effectively the political class tells the American worker is, okay, you're not going to get more money from work, from labor, from wage labor. You'll get it from your home, because your home is going to appreciate. Get your foot in the ladder, get a mortgage early, okay, and then you sell it, and then you keep the surplus value, right? And that created a lot of anxiety, financialized the working class, and then in 2008, their homes gets repossessed, and they lose all that. And then after that, you have the Fed printing all this money, giving it to the few, whereas the many have austerity under Obama and beyond. And then finally, you've got the rise of cloud capital, which because it does away with markets, it individualizes. You know, when you walk into Amazon.com, it's not like walking into a shopping mall. When you want to walk into a shopping mall, at least you are with other people, and you choose whom you talk to. When you are in Amazon.com, the algorithm determines who you are allowed to see and speak to and exchange, money for goods, whatever. There is no socialization that is allowed outside the algorithm. And where socialization is allowed, like Twitter and TikTok and so on, the algorithm is primed to create consternation and to create discontent, because that is what maximizes their capacity to sell things to you, because agitated people, look at the screen more intently.
Merkantilismus ist das auch, ne? Also wenn quasi der freie Markt wieder ausgesetzt wird und einer die Regeln des Marktes sozusagen bestimmt, weil er Amazon heißt.
Techno-feudalism takes over from financialized capitalism seamlessly to enhance the despair of the vast majority. And even if you're a capitalist, you feel despair, because a lot of they are vassal capitalists now. They are sort of surviving. They're ones who've got a small factory. They're being taken to the cleaners by the 0.001%. And that's why they all go to bed at night, crying into their pillows. And that's why, there's so much demand for, your profession across the world. But one last thing, if I may. Imagine if Stasi
Hello, Christina.
or the KGB had access to the algorithms of Meta, Facebook, Google. I mean, my good, these people, there are some people who still survive, like Putin, for instance, from the old KGB. They must be kicking themselves that they had to deploy such crude measures for social control, killing people and putting them in the gulag. Now, as you put, people volunteer their serfdom. People volunteer their serfdom now.
Can I jump in with sorry, Gabor, just one thought. It would be great to talk about resistance in the time that we have left, because Gabor, I know in your book, it's a very sobering, powerful book. You talk about the mental health crisis in such depth, and you really get a sense of the scale of it. But in the last part of it, you do talk about one of the paths to healing can be social engagement, political engagement, activism. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. And
Ja,
there's
das mit der
something specific
Demokratie
on
und der
that
Selbstbestimmtheit
I'd
und
want to
der Würde
ask
und
too.
so.
You often emphasize the importance of authenticity, that some people lose that as infants to maintain attachment to their caregiver, and that can lead to health problems. And just related to that question of authenticity, what do you think the role of anger is in resistance? Because Thich Nhat Hanh, someone who I admire very much, a Zen Buddhist monk who you also mention in your book, he talks very much about the role of transforming anger into compassion, and that being a sort of more powerful, effective fuel for social change. So yeah, your thoughts on any of that, I'd be really curious to hear.
Yeah.
Nach
Well,
die Babsi.
anger is actually, if you look at the emotional circuitry of the brain, we're wired for anger. not only we're wired for anger, all mammals are wired for anger, because anger is a boundary defense. You know, when two animals enter each other's space, and now they don't have to fight because the anger display will actually protect them from having to fight very often. So anger is a boundary defense. So there's such a thing as healthy anger, and it doesn't need to be transformed. In fact, the suppression of healthy anger, which happens to a lot of people growing up in ordinary homes, is a risk factor for mental illness and physical illness, autoimmune disease, and so on, because mind and body being inseparable and the anger being a boundary defense, so is the immune system. So when you repress healthy anger, you're also messing with your immune system. It's that simple. I mean, it's not that simple. I could go into great detail, but that's how it works. So healthy anger is important. Healthy anger simply maintains a boundary and says, no, you can't do this to me. Well, that's essential on a political level, because on a political level, things are being done to people all the time, as Yanis was just eloquently detailing it to us. So there's got to be healthy anger there. There's unhealthy anger, which is unbridled rage that takes over the brain, and you actually lose control. And I've experienced that in my life. It's not healthy for me or anybody else around me. So we have to make a distinction between three manifestations of anger. There's the healthy anger of no more, no passaran, you know, you will not do this to me, both on the individual and the political level. There's the repression of anger, which leads to, which undermines physiological health, and it enables political control. And then there is the rage, where suppressed anger just breaks out of you, and that's damaging to you and everybody else as well. When it comes to resistance, resistance really is a form of healthy anger. It says, no, you will not do this to me. And furthermore, resistance on a political level is breaking out of the individualistic, isolated mindset that capitalism imposes on people. And resistance and activism says that I'm not suffering alone. My suffering is part of a larger suffering. And to break out of it, I have to join with other human beings. And actually, when you look at how human beings evolved, it was not as individualistic, isolated, competitive creatures against one another, but as communal creatures. We lived for millions of years and hundreds of thousands of years, even in the life of our own species, as communal creatures. And activism on a political level restores that communalism of belonging to something greater, which immediately gives you more meaning in life.
David
So I
Silberbeutel,
remember
ja, ich denke schon,
there
klar.
was that brief flowering of resistance, the Occupy.
Also ich meine, es ist ja bekannt, dass wir soziale Spezies sind. Wir brauchen das mit der Partizipation, wir brauchen das mit der Selbstwirksamkeit. Das haben wir in der repräsentativen Demokratie halt nicht, ne?
Wall Street movement. And I remember being in New York then, and I was just seeing the joy and the liberation of those young people, and it was temporary. I didn't think it would last. Of course, by that time I was old and cynical, I suppose, but I didn't think it would maintain itself. But I certainly saw the emotional liberation of having a cause, of having a just cause, and of belonging to something other than just my little social circle. Those are very healthy dynamics. So in that sense, resistance, just as the body needs to resist invasive bacteria or viruses, we talk about resistance in that sense. Political resistance is also a way of manifesting our immune system on a social scale. That's what I would say.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yanis?
It's why I am involved in politics, because it gives me joy. I wake up in the morning and I look forward to the day. I know that
das
I'm going to be
Grind-Set.
defeated politically.
Wenn man eine Motivation hat, dann ist das Grinden nicht so schlimm.
No belief, zero belief that our movement is going to win. I know that, if you're on the left, you get a chance once every 50 years. We got that chance in 2015. We lost. But so what? I know I'm going to die. That doesn't mean I'm not going to have a good day today. Similarly, to be involved in politics for me, in activism, not politics as a career, but as an activist, is it's a path to genuine eudaimonia, to genuine happiness, to genuine satisfaction. But there's one proviso, however, because let's face it, the Nazis also had a sense of belonging and a lot of solidarity amongst themselves, right? Some of them have been, remarkable
Ja,
in
starke In-Group-Dynamik ist das Allerwichtigste, ne?
the way, remarkably
Damit kann man
in
alles schaffen.
the way that they
Yes!
stuck up for one another. And
Autobahn
here, the
bauen.
fascists in Greece, I see them. They are more solidaristic to one another than the leftists are, between you and me. But what is the difference? The difference is that they see their tribal. They see their group as an extension of their own DNA, of their own very, very narrow family. The trick for being joyous through communal action and common action and collective action is to see the whole of humanity as one magma to which you belong, and to be able to enjoy the successes of anyone, however far away and however different they may look to you or sound from you. I think that is the key to genuine happiness. I'm not making a moral point.
No, I understand.
I'm making the point of what works in order to pacify your soul and to make you and to allow you to lead a successful life in the sense of fulfilling your potential, whatever your potential might be.
Well, you mentioned eudaimonia, which is an ancient Greek phrase, and it has to do with joy that comes from a sense of meaning and a sense of contribution, I think. As for being a failure, I've resigned myself a long time ago to being a failure. If you're going to be at all, if you're going to have a conscience, and if you're going to make that conscience evident in the political sphere, you're going to lose all the time. Whether it comes to what's happening right now in Gaza, I'm going to be in a minority, and that's how it's going to be. But you know what, Yanis and Raul, I can think of some great failures in history. Buddha totally failed. How are we doing with the wisdom and love? Jesus was a complete failure. Divine love, forgive, for they know not what they do. We're all brothers. How's that going? Karl Marx was a complete failure. So at least if we're going to fail, maybe it's grandiose, but we're in pretty good company as failures. Let me put it that way.
Ja, und man muss es auch mal so sagen, ich finde, Rechte haben ja gar nichts von all dem. Sie haben keine Vordenker, sie haben keine theoretische Basis. Alles, was sie haben, ist Marketing und sie schleimen sich der aktuellen Machtpyramide an. Das ist der einzige Grund, warum sie existieren können, ne? Weil sie permanent begünstigt werden durch die aktuellen durch den aktuellen Machtkontext. Sie haben nichts auf Tasche. Rechte haben keine Denkleistung auf Tasche, auf die sich das stützt, was sie labern, sondern sie haben nur Marketing. Ne? Ja.
One question on the back of that, because I think we're running out of time. But just about the role of spirituality in all this, you mentioned all those spiritual titans of our history. And I think through your career, Gabor, you've sort of mixed in different circles and spaces, some of them spiritual, some of them more kind of medical.
Okay, sie haben natürlich irgendwelche Sachen, auf die sie sich beziehen, aber die sind doch alle debunked. Das ist doch alles Müll. Ich meine, es ist rechte Ideologie, die ist bescheuert, die ist widersprüchlich. Die braucht zum Beispiel Hierarchien und so, wir wissen es doch.
More political.
Genau, falsch verstandene Nietzsche haben sie.
It seemed increasingly obvious to me that we have to find a way of closing the gaps between these spaces, to making our politics more spiritual and making our spirituality more political.
Und so große Philosophen wie Adolf Hitler.
Perhaps we could just end with your thoughts and then Yanis' thoughts on that relationship, however you want to define spirituality.
You know, the gaps that you mention are more illusory than real, because in real life, it's all one. And it's only to state a scientific fact that, and not to mention a spiritual fact that's been taught by the great teachers for thousands of years, that it's all one, that the universe is all one. We're all manifestations of the universe, and the universe is the manifestations of us. That's not fancy New Age spirituality. That's just actually how it is. So the gaps that we perceive are created
Ja.
by
We are the universe experience itself, ne? So nach dem Motto.
our own ego and our own sense of separation. And realizing those gaps are illusory and self-created, I think is essential. And I'll tell you quite frankly, one of my disappointments, I don't know, disappointments, am I surprised? Maybe I'm not surprised. But with what's going on right now in Gaza, and the horror of it is so clear to anybody with a conscience. There's so many wonderful spiritual teachers and psychologists and healers. I don't want to say this self-righteously. I'm just noticing it with sadness. They're not speaking up. It's as if what was happening in Gaza was in a different realm from the spiritual or psychological realms in which they make such beautiful contributions. I wish it was otherwise, because for me, those gaps that you mentioned, Raul, are again illusory and self-created, and there ought not to be. Ideally, there would not be those chasms between the political, the social, the personal, the physical, and the spiritual realms. And spirituality ultimately for me is not a religion of any kind, but just the oneness, the oneness. And I'm far from manifesting that or feeling it all the time, but something in my bones, I know it, you know?
Well, as a hardened materialist, Marxist, and reconstructed lefty, I started life disdaining the word spirituality.
Natürlich.
Because it simply reflected in my mind the other side of the same coin of power and exploitation. Instead of the emperor, the bishop, with the sermons that steady the hand of the killers, of the exploiters. But then again, I have a deep love of music. I consider myself to be a permanently failed musician. I'm not a musician. That's why I'm failed as a musician, because I'd love to be a musician. But the moment I hear music, and the little bit that I play on the piano, I forget who I am. I genuinely forget who I am. It's not that I get amnesia. I'm simply transported to a different existence. One that is cleansing. One that when I come back to this
Jetzt
life,
schwurbeln die alten weißen Männer mal noch ein
music is
bisschen.
finished. I feel serene. I feel a kind of happiness that no money can buy. So if that's what you mean by spirituality, then that's everything. But then again, it connects with what I was saying earlier about having a capacity to appreciate humanity, not just your tribe, because this is the beauty about music. Whether you like it or not, you're in the middle of the jungle of Latin America, you hear a flute playing, and it's a melody that gets you, right? Or you're in China, or you are in Pakistan, or wherever. And that's where you realize how stupid racism and how stupid nationalism is. Because it's you, it's talking to you, it's doing things to your own chemistry, to your own humanity. So yeah, for me, music is the connection.
Also Meshuggah moshpit jetzt.
Well, I think that's a really beautiful place to end this.
Tschüss.
Just on what you said there, Gabor, about feeling disappointment with some people who are fantastic.
Also, Wir sind Lust. Das ist jetzt die Message.
Spiritual teachers. Again,
Hallo,
how do you
nicely
define that?
sliced and
Not really
diced.
speaking about Gaza and such an obvious horror of our time. I've shared the very same disappointment. I don't quite understand it, and I think everyone interested in those domains and realms should be curious about why that's the case. Because if we don't manage to close these gaps, I don't see a way forward. As you say, it is all one in the end. But look, we could talk for so long. There's so much I'd love to ask, but I think for now we've run out of time. I just want to say thank you to you both, and particularly, at a moment in history when so many people have been silent about the genocide.
So,